Good afternoon. I'm Mike Wells. I'm a member of the Winston-Salem Foundation Committee, and it's my privilege to be with you this afternoon and to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Jim Johnson. Those of you who attended last year will remember that Dr. Johnson gave us a very powerful talk, very charismatic talk driven by facts that are important to all of us as leaders in this community. And I know he will give a very exciting presentation here today. Dr. Johnson is a distinguished professor of strategy and entrepreneurship at UNC's Kenan-Flagler Business School. He is a researcher, an author, and a frequent speaker on many topics, including community and economic development, the effects of demographic changes in our workplace, and urban poverty and public policy in urban America. He has published more than 100 scholarly research articles, including co-authoring the 2011 report that served as the basis for his remarks last year, 6 Disruptive Demographic Trends, what Census 2010 will reveal. This report identified major shifts in our country's demographics and the far-reaching implications and opportunities, as I mentioned, served as the basis for his wonderful comments to us last year. Dr. Johnson believes that education is our greatest challenge and our greatest opportunity, as we all do. The Durham Scholars Program, an innovative program initiated by Dr. Johnson at Kenan-Flagler in 1995, offers students with promise and few economic opportunities an after-school, weekend, and summer tutoring and enrichment program in grades 6 through graduation. Students receive college scholarship funding and develop invaluable connections through the mentoring program with Kenan-Flagler MBA students. This program is very similar to our program here in Winston-Salem, Crosby Scholars, which has done so much to give children with challenges the opportunity not only to graduate from high school, but to go on to schools of stellar reputation and to build a better life. Dr. Johnson is a native of Pitt County. He received his undergraduate degree from North Carolina Central University, his MS degree from the University of Wisconsin, and his PhD from Michigan State University. Please join me in welcoming back to Winston-Salem our friend, Dr. Jim Johnson.
Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be with you this afternoon, to have the opportunity to share with you a few thoughts on a slightly different topic today. I want to talk about this notion of what constitutes a sustainable community and how you know one when you see one. In my day job, I spend a lot of time helping communities around the United States and in other countries think about how to reposition themselves in a highly volatile global economy of the 21st century. Many communities have to reinvent given the big economic and demographic shifts we find ourselves in the midst of. And so in the time allotted me, I want to give you a quick recap of what I talked about last year. It's already been mentioned, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. And I want to draw a distinction between what we call 20th century urbanism and 21st century new urbanism, and then present to you a model that we use in helping communities think about sustainability. What you should know and understand is that if Company A today announces that they're looking for a location to open a new facility or to relocate a facility, there are 14,000 US-based communities that are competing for that business. That doesn't include the international ones. And most of the time, companies don't choose those communities themselves. They hire what are called site selection consultants and site relocation consultants to help them come up with a short list of communities. So the real question is what kinds of things do those site selection consultants consider in deciding what short list of communities to recommend to a particular place? And so we've developed one of those models. I'm going to share it with you. And then I have snooped around a little bit to figure out whether you all need to be on the list or not. And so last year I talked about the 6 big disruptive demographic trends. They're up there. I'm not going to spend any time, but I'm going to weave them into my presentation today about what I found out about Winston-Salem in my snooping exercise. If you look at and think about cities and the way cities developed in the 20th century, we had a housing policy that favored new construction over rehabilitation and segregation over integration. We had a transportation policy that favored the automobile over mass transit. And we had a whole series of exclusionary zoning policies that were used to control land use and the composition of communities. When you put those things together, a housing policy that favored new construction over rehab and rehabilitation, a transportation policy that favored the car over mass transit, and these exclusionary policies, the end product was something we call sprawl, uncontrolled urban growth, and the end product was something we call segregation by class and race in our communities. The end consequences of that was huge urban congestion, environmental pollution from cars, brown air cities, and from manufacturing plants, gray air cities, segregated communities by class and race, incredible number of accidents and fatalities, and obesity and other problems. Basically, ladies and gentlemen, we created an urban system where we were sitting in our cars with Big Mac in one hand, telephone in the other, driving down the road, running into killing each other on freeways. That's what 20th century urbanism was all about. So the challenge for the 21st century then is, how do we create healthy, viable, and sustainable communities? How do we put sprawl on a diet? How do we get people out of those cars, stop eating all of that stuff, talking on those phones, and getting fat and out of shape? We talk about how do we create sustainable communities. Well, what is a sustainable community? We say a sustainable community is a 3-legged stool. We call it the triple bottom line of sustainability, where as you promote urban development and growth and the like, you do no harm to the environment and you protect natural resources. You adhere to principles of social justice and equity while returning great shareholder, stakeholder value. It's not a 1-legged stool. It's not a 2-legged stool, it's a 3-legged stool, and everything you do in your community, you hold it up to those 3 legs of the stool. Now, this is a bit challenging sometimes because on the environmental front, many of the we have a lot of hazard-prone areas that are symbols of status. And so, fragile mountainsides, oceanfront property, and the like. We like building on those things. I'm reminded of my first job was at UCLA, and when I went out in the rainy season to interview for my job, and one of the guys that took me out to dinner had a little bit too much to drink, and he started talking about mudslides, and somebody kicked him under the table and said, "Shut up, fool, we're trying to recruit the guy." The Chapel Hill, and he said quickly, well, mudslides aren't so bad. My house slid into a better neighborhood. And so there are some kinds of things that are beneficiary, but in general, this is not something you want to do. You want to think about, is it you? So at the global level, we talk about profits, planet, and people. At the local level, we talk about social equity, environmental stewardship, and shareholder value. It's the sweet spot that we are trying to achieve in communities today when we talk about this notion of sustainability. Well, we've done this work in about 50 or 60 cities in the U.S., in Mexico, and in Southeast Asia. And I want to share with you some of the characteristics, what we know about a sustainable place. First and foremost, A sustainable community is actively and aggressively pursuing strategic alliances with other communities, both domestically and internationally, with an eye toward developing not only cultural ties, but also profit-centered activities that generate revenue and create jobs for local citizenry. Most of you are familiar with sister city relationships. Those are mostly cultural kind of ties. Y'all just like to go visit somewhere and have a good time. That's not about creating jobs. What you want to do is leverage those ties for competitive advantage for your local community by creating opportunities for foreign direct investment in your community, tourism activities, and a whole range of other things in that regard. A sustainable community creates a regulatory environment that promotes and supports the generation of new community wealth via civic entrepreneurial ventures and innovations that are designed specifically to sustain and enhance the health, competitiveness, and vitality of your community. What is community wealth? It's neither personal, it's neither corporate, it's wealth to effectuate social change in communities. And if you can't make decisions at the local level at the speed of business, you can't be competitive and you can't be sustainable. And that's what people look for today. Can you make decisions at the speed of business? I've studied some communities where if you wanted a business permit, you probably had to pay somebody out under the table. The next community over, you can go on the website and get a business plan, a business permit. Which one of those communities you want to do business with? It's not hard to figure out, and both exist out there. Sustainable communities recognize the need for and is committed to a continuous investment in a world-class physical infrastructure that connects it to the regional, national, and international economy. This economy, the 21st century economy, is about moving information and being able to move it at breakneck speed. Three things matter: speed, speed, and more speed, and you have to have the infrastructure to be able to do it, and that's what sustainable communities do. Sustainable communities invest heavily in their educational systems, all aspects of the system, to ensure the availability of education and training programs for its citizenry, basically to compete in the highly volatile economy of the 21st century. And they instill in their citizens, especially its youth, the attitudes, values, and beliefs about education and work that are the key to the knowledge and upwardly mobile knowledge economy of the 21st century. You might say everybody does that. Not everybody does that. We have communities today where a disproportionate share of the population has aged out of the childbearing years, and they vote self-interest. They have no dog in the K-12 education fight, so they say, that's not my problem. I'm concerned about retirement amenities, crime, and safety. I'm not concerned about K-12. Sustainable communities get people to understand you do have a dog in the fight. It's called the future competitiveness of our community and our nation, and we have to get people to understand all of that. Finally, sustainable communities strive to reduce to the maximum extent possible geographical, racial, and/or ethnic and class disparities by investing substantial resources in an array of community building institutions, the WISE and the Boys and Girls Clubs and those kind of mediating institutions that are designed to mend the social fabric and build bridges to the educational and economic mainstream of our communities. In an economic downturn, one of the first things that's typically cut are these kinds of mediating institutions. It's one of the worst things that you can do if you do that. Investing in those bridge building kinds of institutions are very, very important. What we have done with what we found is developed a civic entrepreneurial model of sustainability that says a healthy, sustainable community is comprised of 6 kinds of capital assets: polity capital, physical capital, human, financial, social, and cultural capital. And I'm going to define them for you really quickly. Polity capital: commitments from the local government and organizations to continuously strive to enhance the health and social economic well-being of local residents and to advance the community in the competitive global marketplace. Your physical capital assets, that network of highways, railways, airports, telecommunication systems, as well as walking, jogging, and biking trails that form the infrastructure of your community. It also involves parks and recreation areas, community rooftop gardens, exercise facilities. All of that stuff is part of your physical capital asset. Your financial capital, having access to both traditional and non-traditional sources of revenue that support the provision of services and promote future economic growth and development. So community development, venture capital funds, just like traditional venture capital funds, social innovation funds, a whole series of different kinds of capital assets to promote community economic development, and having individuals with a human capital asset base that is comprised of both hard skills and soft skills. Those soft skills are the intangibles, the way you look, the way you talk, the way you dress, this thing called attitude. Nobody knows what's in the attitude box. They just know when you have a bad one. Cultural capital, residents with the appropriate values, attitudes, and beliefs about their current life chances and their future opportunities in the community. Oftentimes, we ignore culture in our education system. We have a one-size-fits-all. We put kids in a box, and when they don't fit, we say they have attention deficit disorder. Well, you know, creative people, by definition, have attention deficit disorder. You know, they've moved on to the next thing while you're still navel-gazing over here. We need more attention deficit disorder in America, and recognize that in entrepreneurial spirit. And we've already talked about one of these capitals. We have people up here receiving awards for their efforts in the area of building social capital. These are resources, both personal and institutional, through which individuals maintain their social identity and receive emotional support, material aid and services, and information and new social contacts. Most of us have what is called bonding social capital. Usually that is capital from people that are just like us. What's crucial in society is something called bridging social capital. The more diverse your networks are, the better off you're going to be. It's not just strong ties that matter, it's the strength of your weak ties that are key to success in society today. And social capital, bridging social capital, is about building for kids and others in the community those weak ties that are going to really, really matter. Well, typically what we do is snoop around communities when folks ask us to come in to evaluate where they are now. We do something called a 2,000-foot view. We don't talk to anybody in the community. We go out and collect our own intelligence on the community, and then we walk in and tell the community the way it looks to the outside world. And typically when I do this, I can walk into a room, never been there before, name everybody in the room by name, tell you who doesn't like each other sitting at the table, tell you who's doing something they ain't got no business, and all of that stuff. Because, see, ladies and gentlemen, in an internet economy, there's nothing I can't find out about you within about 10 seconds. And so don't shoot the messenger for the message, because I have been snooping on you all. You're the 4th largest city in North Carolina. You're experiencing both browning and graying. You have a diversified employment base. You have a lower cost of living than peer cities in the southeast region. You got a pro-business climate, strong philanthropic community, and you've produced an award-winning development guide for the new century and an ambitious plan for downtown. Y'all got it all bag, all that in a bag of chips. You know who your large employers are. We're going to post this on the website. You can look at it. Y'all are an affordable place. When you look at comparative cities, you are a more affordable place, and thus should be more attractive for foreign direct investment, for talent, and a whole range of other things. Your population is growing, not as rapidly as the state of North Carolina, but you're growing. It grew by about 14%, adding about 45,000 new people during the first decade of the new millennium. And since 2010, you got balanced growth. You're growing as a function of the excess of births over deaths, and more people are moving to your community than leaving. That's all good. Adding about 7,000 people between 2010 and 2012. If you look at your browning, as I indicated, you added 45,000 people to your population. About half of that growth was among Hispanics, growing by about 113%. Note that your white population only grew by about 1.8%. So all of your growth is what I call the browning of America. It's occurring among people of color here in the region. So you ask what share is browning? 92% of that 45,000 people were people of color, and 50% of them were Hispanic. That's the browning of America. That's transforming your community in ways that it's unparalleled and you haven't had before. And because you have young people moving into your community, your age structure is being affected by all of this. So you look at the median age of women in Forsyth County is about 38 years old. Half of you women are older than that, half of y'all are younger than that. But if you go down and look at that Hispanic female, what's the median age? About 23. That's because migration and immigration are age-selective processes. What does that mean? Far more young people migrate and immigrate than old people. That means old people don't move, they move slower and at a lower propensity than young people. Now, ladies, there's something I told you all last year, but let me tell you again. There's something in demography called completed fertility. I'm not going to give you the big theory behind it. Let me tell you what the pop version of it is. Ladies, completed fertility is when you tell your spouse to go take out the trash. There ain't nothing else happening here. Completed fertility for women occurred between the ages of 40 and 44. What you will notice from this graphic is that the median age of a non-Hispanic white female is 44.8 in Winston-Salem. Okay? You will look at all of the other women. They are women of color. You'll see a 10 to 20-year age gap. That's known as the fertility gap. So what you can expect coming into your school system, you know where it's going to come from. Now, I know some of y'all thinking, I don't believe that. I'm going home and fix this tonight. You go right ahead. And so if you look at your age structure, what you will see is that you are, in essence, an aging population because you got rapid growth among the 65-plus population and the 45 to 64. Those of us, the 45 to 64, is that boomer population who are aging, turning 65 to the tune of 8,000 per day. That will continue every day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for the next 20 years. That's the pig and the python, that aging phenomenon. And you will note that your 25 to 44-year-old population decline. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the population that has to pay into Social Security and all of that to keep the system going. If you don't nurture and grow that population or be open to immigrants, you're going to be in deep trouble. Be deep trouble because you can't go home and fix it in spite of no matter how hard you try. So, and when I continue to scope you out, downtown recognized as one of the best in America by Forbes, ranked in the top 25 best places to retire in 2013. Number 6 ranking from CNN Money as a place to retire. Got the America's best farmers market. Top 10 cheapest U.S. cities to live in. I don't know about that cheap, y'all. Number 2 most livable downtown, ranked number 46 among America's top large cities. Number 10 among America's most fun, affordable cities. Number 12 best film school ranking. Number 18 in the world's cheapest city for expensive living. I can't figure that one out. I've been looking at that one for about 2 days, but anyway, that's y'all. Number 22, the best minor league market in the U.S. All of those things are out there saying that you all are all of that in a bag of chips. And you just got this huge, big award from the American Planning Association for the new development plan, and you have to celebrate that big award of being innovative for addressing some of the kinds of concerns, moving toward this notion of sustainable communities. This legacy planning guide, combined city-county kind of initiative is very, very important, and you're to be congratulated for that. But as I further looked, there's some weaknesses and some threats here. Urban sprawl, something I call the migration paradox, some health, education, and income disparities, and both hyper-segregation and concentrated poverty. This is what the Forsyth County tomorrow had to say about Winston-Salem and the vagaries of sprawl. Growth in Winston-Salem and Forsyth County in the last 20 years has changed the face of our community. Suburban sprawl, taking the form of low-density, single-family divisions, have become prevalent and reaches even further into the countryside, has drained the vitality from downtown Winston-Salem, caused the deterioration of older urban residential neighborhoods, and helped divide us as a community. Our quality of life is being threatened by the sprawl that consumes more land and resources than are needed for a livable community. And here's something interesting. You have more people moving to your community than are leaving, but the interesting thing is the ones that are leaving make more money than the ones coming in. That's not the way you want to be. You can leave, but don't take all the money with you. And so this is something that you got to figure out about why that is the case. You're losing about $2,380 per person because of first leaving. Then I looked at something called the Human Development Index. This is an index that you can use to compare yourself with other countries around the United States and around the world. And the Human Development Index has 3 dimensions to it. It has a health index called a long and healthy life, and life expectancy at birth is the measure for the health index. It has an access to knowledge dimension. The education index is 2 things, school enrollment and educational attainment, and then it has a living standards index of median earnings. And the Human Development Index ranges between 0 and 10. Okay, and so if you look at North Carolina, we have a 4.1 Human Development Index for North Carolina. Compared Wake County and Forsyth County, both are above the state average. Wake at about 5.48 and Forsyth County at about 4.28. And then I put the indexes for whites and African Americans down there, and what you will see is that there is a gap in the Human Development Index, a racial disparity gap in Forsyth County of about 1.56 points. For the whites, it's about 5.36. For African Americans, about 3.8 here in Forsyth County. If you unpack it, you see similar kinds of disparities on the health index, the earnings index, and the education index, with the biggest difference in the earnings index across the county. This is the one that I think is most interesting, ladies and gentlemen, the life expectancy index. And if you look at birth, the life expectancy at birth in Forsyth County is about 78.5 years. That means the average person being born today is going to live about 78.5 years. For whites, it's about 79.6 years. For African Americans, it's about 74.9 years. What that means, ladies and gentlemen, if there's a black kid born today and a white kid born today, the white kid at birth has a life expectancy dividend of 4.7 years longer than the average black kid. 2 kids born the same time today, there's a 4.7-year difference in their life expectancy. If you move it up to 20 years, there's a 4.1-year difference. If you move it to 45 years old, the 45-year-old today, there's a 3.7-year difference. And if you're 65 in black and white, there's a 2.1-year difference in life expectancy. Basically, it's an enormous disparity that you have to think about a little bit. And if you look at educational attainment, you look at less than the percentage of your population over 25 with less than a high school education, about 8.1% of whites find themselves in that situation, about 14% of African Americans, and about 47% of the Latino population finds itself in the city. Look at the other extreme, bachelor's degree, about 38%, 37% of whites, 21, 22 for blacks, 10 or 11%. Those are enormous disparities in life. And the one that I would draw your attention to, if you look at the African American population of people who are bachelor's degree holders, of those who are bachelor's degree holders, 62% of them are female, only 39% are male. A huge sex ratio imbalance there, which means that African American women have a tough time finding eligible, marriageable males, that is, someone with a comparable education to connect with. And if you look at our school system, And this is important stuff because where your growth is going is where we have the greatest challenges. These are pass rates on third grade reading tests for 2011, 2012. About 84% of Asian kids pass, 84% of white kids, multiracial about 70%, and then it drops off. African American and Hispanic in the 40s, 47, 43. And if you unpack it by gender, it still holds that huge disparity between kids of color, for the most part, and then Asians and whites. You got this huge divide. That's at the third grade. The same thing applies at the 8th grade. Huge divides in terms of performance. You can look at these on your own, and if you I put in the 2012-2013 assessment because this is supposed to be aligned with college and career readiness. We're down to 28 and 22% respectively of Hispanic and black kids passing that test and being college ready. That's your new majority. That's the growth sector that you got to be mindful of. You see the data there for males and females. It's a challenge. The other thing that's a big challenge is if you look at short-term suspensions, I believe it's 1 to 10 to 12 days or something like that. Huge disparities in terms of who gets suspended. If you're not in school, ladies and gentlemen, you can't learn, you can't grow, and you can't develop. You can figure out how to solve that problem. And if you go on to the community college level in Winston-Salem and say, well, what percentage of kids entering the technical schools graduate in 4 years? That's the marker that we typically use for community colleges. You see the numbers, about a third of young people finish in 4 years. It's huge disparities, about 20%, 22, 23% of African Americans, and you see the gender differences here. A third is a challenge. That means 70% aren't. Huge disparities in income. You can see that there, about a 9,000 difference. Not as great as in Wake County, but a little bit greater than the average for the state as a whole. I think part of the problem here, sociologists would say, is something we call hyper-segregation, which is a holdover from the 20th century urbanism. Those brown counties, those brown census tracts in this map are 60% or more African American. They actually range from 60% African American to 100% African American. And the blue tracts are 60% white to 100% white. And the yellow are those zones in transition. You're talking about enormous kind of segregation. And if you look at the next map, concentrated poverty, high correlations. Those dark blue tracts are extreme poverty tracts where 40% or more of the individuals have incomes below the poverty level, and it ranges from 40% to 80-some% of people have incomes below the poverty level. The lighter blue are high poverty tracts, 20 to 39% households in poverty. In some of these communities, upwards of over half of the people didn't work last year. And so you have some serious kinds of isolation. And this is an interesting map because these are license check calls in the Winston-Salem area, license checks calls made by officers to computer-aided dispatch. When you have high degrees of spatial isolation, racial isolation, concentrated poverty, you begin to get these kinds of relationships that raises all kinds of questions and issues in your community. Then at the same time, you have an aging elderly population, and I've unpacked the elderly into the young olds, 65 to 74, the middle olds, 75 to 84, and the oldest of the old, 85 plus. And what I would just draw your attention to is you have the greatest growth of the oldest old in the white population. You can see it here in this graphic. But you have these concentrated elderly communities in the dark blue here. These are places, about 13% of the population is elderly, and these are over 15% and Yeah, over more than 15% in the dark blue, and it ranges as high as 33% of the population in some of those communities are seniors. We have to make sure that those communities are senior friendly and that all of Winston-Salem is senior friendly, because we're aging so dramatically and everything has to change as a function of an aging population. So part of sustainability is about universal design, redevelopment with equal opportunity of access in mind, and that is something that you have to be mindful of here. So moving forward, lots of people on sustainability focus on the environmental stuff, making sure that they get that right. Few communities around the world, around the country, are getting the social equity kinds of stuff right, and I think that that's the thing that we all have to be mindful of and concerned with. The way we talk to people about doing this is having the foresight to create your own healthy future, designing creating a strategy for the future that says what you want your community to look like in terms of poverty and inequality, how do you eliminate those kinds of things, and that's what this is a framework for doing that. If you don't know where you've come from, it's pretty hard to figure out where you're going, so thinking about the past is important, then thinking about the present. What are the kinds of things that are going to help you reposition? Understanding those strengths, those weaknesses, where those threats and where real opportunities for transforming the community are, and then developing your own scenario for a healthy future, and then getting busy and getting the job done. We can win at this. We have never taken a back seat to anybody in this country. We've always been a leader in the state of North Carolina. This is not just a social or moral issue, it is a competitiveness issue. You cannot thrive and prosper and compete if you leave a large generation of young people behind. It's a form of enlightened self-interest to invest in it. You have many of the elements in this room to make it happen. And I think the will exists here. All we have to do is execute. I thank you very much for the opportunity to share, to peer through the window.